I'm Elaine Sanchez, founder of Caregiver Help, and I am back with Dr. Joseph Casciani, and he is a geropsychologist, and he is joining me in these really interesting discussions about life after caregiving, aging solo. And I would add to that, based on all of your work, Dr. Casciani, that it is aging solo and aging well.
Yes.
So I think that that is that's something that we are going to be talking about here. And today we're going to be talking about what I think is one of the most difficult things for most caregivers to cope with after the death of the loved one, and that is guilt. Um, Now, I had an email from a woman a couple of years ago, and she was so overwhelmed with guilt. Now, get this. She had cared for her husband by herself with
Mm,
ALS 24 hours a day for 7 years. She had never had any help come in. She knew that it was going to eventually lead to his demise. She didn't expect it right away, but something happened one night and he was coughing or having a hard time breathing or whatever, and it was nothing new. And she went to bed, and when she woke up in the morning, he was dead.
mm,
And then she wrote to me and she said, I am so overwhelmed with guilt. She said, I know there were times when I wasn't kind to him. There were times when I was tired and frustrated, and I probably was a little rough with the way I handled his body.
mm,
I didn't say goodbye to him, even though I knew that, he wasn't going to live forever. And she was just racked with guilt. And I suggested that she sit down and write him a letter and say, I
mm,
want you to say in a letter everything that you wish you had said to him and anything that you feel badly about. And then hang on to it as long as you need. And then, have a burial for that when you're done with
mm,
it. And I also encouraged her to get involved in a hospice grief counseling group because I
mm.
said, guilt is a normal thing, but for crying out loud, anybody that's been taking care
Sure.
of a person with ALS without any help for 7 years, I can't imagine the level of exhaustion that you must feel mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Mm,
So that's kind of an extreme case, but I find that
mhm.
most caregivers have guilt over feeling like they didn't do enough, or they weren't kind enough, or that, over
Mm,
times when they got angry. So
mm.
can you help us kind of put this into perspective?
Yeah, I give you some of my thoughts. It's possible to feel this relief and sadness
Mhm.
and anger and exhaustion all at once.
Yes.
And, the guilt comes in when we say, I should have done more.
Mhm.
Why me? Why was it him? And why did I get to survive? Why, maybe after an accident, this case with ALS,
Yeah.
not so unusual. I think it's probably more common than people realize that
Mhm.
what we call survivor guilt, guilty for not just for surviving, but for not doing more. Well, I should
Right.
have done more, or I shouldn't have snapped so often. I shouldn't have, lost lost control. And I think we need to accept the fact that interconnected with guilt is anger. And
Yes.
we can kind of experience if it's turned back at us, but
Mhm.
sometimes it may be healthier to express it as anger at the other person.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
spent my whole life, or I spent the last 7 years taking care of you all
Mhm.
by myself. I didn't allow other people to come in and take it. I didn't want to, I didn't want you to experience other people, who might not have been as careful. So I'm angry that I had to do all this, and I spent
Mhm.
so not to put the spotlight on anger, but it's mixed in with the guilt.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
for this person who you just described, um, that is a long time. And I like your suggestion to write a letter. What I've done sometimes is just ask the person to talk to him or her who's
Mhm.
passed away in the chair, in the empty chair.
Mhm.
What
Mhm.
would you like to say to him? just like writing the letter.
Mhm.
And of course, we're guarded and protected, and it's very difficult to let those emotions surface and
Mhm.
be expressed. But that's a good approach because again, it's when those feelings are locked away, they're very influential. They control
Mhm.
us in many ways that we don't even realize. So we need to let those unpleasant, very objectionable feelings out. And
Mhm.
it's common after the death of a spouse, but it might be maybe after a medical event. Why did I recover and she didn't recover?
Mhm.
An accident, like I said, a flood or hurricane or some disaster. Why them? Why not me? Why I should have done more. I don't deserve to feel okay. Again, it's guilt layered on top of the grief, but also
Mhm.
connected with the anger. And it's difficult, it's what we see as a difficulty in, enjoying life. There's no joy in my life. I can't move. I'm too guilt ridden, and I blame myself. And that's unfortunate. We turn it inward,
Mhm.
and again, that's a little buffer. That's a little protection from. I don't want to face the anger that I really feel toward my.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
one of the things I think that people struggle with sometimes is when you are faced with the choice of life extending treatments
Hmm.
and whether you choose to do them and then, the person lives and suffers, or if you choose to not do them and then you feel guilty or you wonder,
Yeah,
you know, did I essentially pull the plug and he or she could have recovered?
yeah,
Was I just ready for them to go?
yeah.
So I think those sometimes are issues that cause caregivers to feel guilty after someone has died.
Sure. Oh, heavy duty. Yeah, those are
Heavy.
those are massive
Yeah.
struggles and conflicts. And of course, we talk about sharing our wishes while we're still
Yes.
alert and
Yes.
able to. But at the same time, when we say I have to listen to the doctors, they're not going to recover, so let's pull the plug. It's very difficult to pull the plug,
Yes.
of course, to have it done in hospitals, but that's a decision. And there's no easy answer there. We'll never know. We'll never know if we had done the other choice, would things have
That's
turned
true.
out differently? We'll never know that. And we can fault ourselves for choosing A over B or choosing B over A, but we'll never know. And all we can do is make the most informed decision based on what we shared together in the
Mm-hmm.
past and what our preferences were, what
Mm-hmm.
our life-sustaining
Mm-hmm.
practices we
Mm-hmm.
want them to be, and we can still be racked with the indecisiveness, but all we can do is make the most informed decision that we
Right.
can.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
yeah, and again, it's normal. This survivor guilt is common
Mm-hmm.
and understandable. And should I have done more? Should I have not been so impatient? Should I have been,
Mm-hmm.
whatever?
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
should have prevented this. Instead, we can say, I wish things had been different.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Uh, let's
Exactly.
stop the finger pointing and the fault
Yeah.
finding
Yeah.
from I should have done something different to I wish things had turned out
Yes.
different. And it's
I like that.
the same thought. It's just
Mm-hmm.
reframing that
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
thought. Sure.
I talk about all of the time replacing the word guilt with the word regret,
Mm, sure.
because guilt is a sense of having done something wrong
Yeah.
or having failed in an obligation, and
Yeah.
then regret, feeling it as a sense of disappointment or wishing that things
Yeah.
could be different.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point. That's
And so, I feel guilty about, that I said, let's discontinue treatment.
yeah.
Rather, I regret that that was the most logical, compassionate choice I had at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that we need to give ourselves a lot of grace and understand that when you are under pressure to care for somebody, and when you are in these really, really difficult and long-term caregiving situations that you have to make the best decision you can at the time you're presented with it. And then I really think it's important for people to forgive themselves, you know, for whatever situation they were in, for the decision they made, or, if they weren't always
Mhm.
a saint, we're
Yeah.
human, right?
Yeah. Well, it's like we can't fault ourselves for a decision we made 5 years ago. And 5 years from now, we can't fault ourselves for the decision we make today
Okay.
because what we are deciding is based on all the facts, all the factors, all the information and
Mhm.
this is the best decision. Yeah, 5 years from now, we can look back and say, why did you do that? Why did I ever let myself do that? Well, you can't change it, of course, and you can't say, oh, you made the wrong. We always, we tend to look at our past and look at some of the bad decisions we made, maybe in relationships or
Mhm.
business or anything that we've done. And we can't fault ourselves because at the time we were going on the best information we had at the time. Maybe if we
Yeah.
had to do over, we'd do something different.
Yes.
Point is, uh, we, like you said, we get all the information we can, and we, weigh everything and come up with a decision. I When I give talks to senior groups, we talk about establishing new roles. And one example I use is, okay, the spouse comes down with dementia, Alzheimer's disease, for example, and
Mhm.
progresses, and the
Mhm.
spouse is the caregiver.
Mhm.
And like it or not, that's the new role that I have.
Mhm.
We used to be a happily married couple and we used to
Mhm.
do
Mhm.
things with friends, but now my role is taking care of my spouse. It's not
Right.
what we wanted. I regret that it's happened,
Right.
but it is my role. And that's the important part that we have to accept. That we
Mhm.
sometimes we don't have a choice. Yeah, we
Right.
do maybe if we can bring in help, but we often don't have a choice, and that's my
Right.
new role. And okay, that can change. All right, person progresses, advances, maybe goes into the hospital, maybe eventually dies
Mhm.
from multiple conditions,
Mhm.
and that role is over, but the transition, as you're talking about,
Mhm.
moving from that total caregiver role
Mhm.
to
Mhm.
now what's next, that's what we're having this conversation about. And how
Right.
do we let go of that role? And it's perfectly okay to let go of that role and look at what's next. So I think it's it's tough being human, right? Because we have a lot of these
Yes.
emotions and we have to respect them, but I've said earlier, we don't want to be controlled by the emotions. So yeah, the guilt is there and it's normal and it's very common. Don't be swallowed up by it,
Yeah.
and let it out. The letter, the conversation, whatever we want to do,
Mhm. Mhm.
express those feelings. And
Mhm.
it's a mix of emotions, like we
It
said,
is.
the
Yeah.
loss, the sadness. I really miss him or I really miss her. I'm
Yes.
so angry at him when he would ask me 5 times what time is when's dinner. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
uh, it's all a big mess of emotions, and it's
Yeah.
hard to sort it out, but it's possible. We can sort those feelings out.
We can.
Yeah,
And I like the idea of a ceremony. I'll tell this one story and
yeah.
then we'll wrap up this. When I went through a divorce, a really difficult divorce, and three teenage kids, and there was a situation that I did not handle well at
Mm,
all with my son. He was 18 at the time, and I just felt so guilty about it. And I
mm,
carried this for decades. And it was a couple of years ago, a friend of mine invited me to come to a summer solstice party.
mm,
And so I said, okay, what can I bring? And she said, bring something to eat, something to drink, and something to burn. And
mm,
I said, well, what would I bring to burn? And she said, well, do you have any old anger or guilt or any old resentment that you'd like to get rid of? And I said, Actually, I do. So I
Yeah,
sat down and I wrote about this incident. I wrote about everything that he did. I wrote about what I did. I wrote about, how really
mm,
embarrassed and ashamed I was of how I handled that so poorly. And then
sure.
put it in an envelope, took it to the bonfire, threw it on the fire, and I saw it go up in smoke and,
Yeah,
the little black ashes. And it was like, okay. And it helped me
mm,
release
yeah,
my attachment to that. So the
yeah,
funny thing is, a couple years after that, I went out for breakfast with my son, and at that point, I think he was 48 or 49.
yeah,
And I told him about this whole thing, and you know what his response was?
yeah.
He
Ah,
had no memory of it,
ah.
and
Yeah,
no memory at
yeah,
all of the
yeah.
incident. And so
Mm,
I've joked and said he could probably tell you a lot of other things that I did to, to kind of mess up his childhood.
mm,
But that wasn't one of them. And so
yeah,
I think,
yeah,
the point I try to make to people is forgive yourself, let
yeah,
it go. If you
yeah.
need to apologize to somebody, do that and then be done with it.
For sure.
And
Yeah,
as you say, 5 years from now, you can't go back tomorrow and make a different choice,
yeah,
but you
that's right.
can choose about how you're going to go forward with it
That's a great story. That's a great story because he didn't remember anything about what was plaguing you all these years.
for decades.
And I wonder if he remembered things that you've forgotten too,
Oh,
right?
I'm sure he has.
Yeah. You know, I recently read a book called Remember by Lisa Genova,
Uh-huh.
neuroscientist, and it's a great story about memory. And one of her points is that when we remember things, they're very different from what actually happened.
Yes.
Because our brain goes through, so many different, um, she called it a kind of a degradation process where certain memory traces just aren't there anymore. And what's left is a variation of what the original event was. So
Yes.
that I think that, is an example of you remembered something was very powerful in your brain, but for your son, there was no memory of it. And
Right.
I think that's a normal process that we can experience recalls and recollections that are so
Yes.
different from what a
Yes.
spouse or what a friend or what a
Yes.
teacher or what. So
So
um,
we can choose to forgive others and we can also choose to forgive ourselves.
yeah, of course. Of
Yeah.
course. Yeah. So that was a great ritual, burning that memory
Yeah.
in the bonfire. And
Yeah.
you probably felt a sense of relief and your
I
body kind
did.
of lightened a little bit
It
as you
did.
let that
It
go.
did. And
With
that
all the
was
smoke.
because of that. That's why I encouraged the woman who had cared for her husband with ALS to write it
Yeah.
and to hang on to it until she was ready to let go of it and then to burn it. Because I
Burn
think
it.
a ceremony to
Yeah.
let go of something big
Yeah.
can be very healing.
Yeah. Rituals are very powerful. Very
Yeah.
powerful.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure.
All right. Well, I think this wraps up our conversation on guilt after death and releasing yourself from some of these really difficult emotions and giving yourself permission to move forward without having that heavy burden in your heart, on your back,
Yeah.
and weighing you down. So thank you, Dr.
Yeah.
Casciani. It's great visiting with you, and we'll be back soon.
You're welcome, Elaine. Thanks so much.